built there, and that's the last remaining money out of that bond measure, $228 million that provided a lot of great things. Community centers, trails, parks and some fields. We have soccer fields that are being built, and now we'll have the softball fields in. And Parks and Rec staff really supported it being built out there, and we also are getting the developer to donate 12.5 acres. And I think, you know, getting donors to donate land and to help is another part of the puzzle here too. We know we have someone in District 10 that's donating millions of dollars for Steinbeck Park. We have this donation that's happening with Arcadia. There's other significant donations. I think we need to work hard with the folks in the community to make sure that we take advantage of those donations as well as all the other partnerships. I think it's really important. I know we keep talking joint use, but that is, we do need to continue to work with schools throughout the community to make sure that we are utilizing, being able to work together with them to provide these amenities. We did in Ocala, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ocala, we have 3 new fields there working with Ocala to provide sports opportunities. These fields across the street from Eastridge are going to allow tournament play. They're incredibly important, not only for the youth, but for adults. And yeah, we're field deficient. I mean, it said that in the national, it's been written in national magazines that we need to have more fields, but I think we're going to have to pick these opportunities and work towards them to make it happen over time.
Thank you. So, have we gotten around now? Yes. I'm so confused. One of our audience questions touches on the homeless issue, which I was deciding whether it was truly a parks issue, but I realize now it absolutely is. It certainly is in some of the larger encampments. So let's talk about, from a parks perspective, what is your solution to getting the homeless out of the parks, protecting the environment, protecting the creeks, and also getting people into a productive environment and safe environment? Did we at Madison? I forget. Who was it? Who is Sam?
Sam.
Who was that?
Thank you all.
Well, there is no one solution. This is a really complex, challenging problem because it involves human beings, and human beings, obviously, who are in their predicament for lots of different reasons. And so we need lots of solutions, and there is simply no pot of money to be able to go house the thousands of people currently in all of our parks or creeks and our streets. What I push is a series of different initiatives. One is trying to get Downtown Streets team down here. A couple of years ago, we started a pilot project in Coyote Creek. We leveraged some funding from the eBay Foundation, Water District, and other sources. And now at the 2-year mark, we see that they've employed 55 people who are permanently housed or cleaning the creeks they once lived in. Dozens more are also working full-time, and they're in transitional housing. And I'm working on ways to expand that program now citywide in various ways, partnering with different corporations who are willing to sponsor gateways that Downtown Streets team can also be cleaning around the entrances to our city. So we can expand programs like this in partnership with great nonprofits. I also led an initiative to rehabilitate some of our rundown motels, use them for housing. And fortunately, the council approved a pilot of that project a couple weeks ago. We'll launch that this summer. Rose Herrera joined me with an initiative we'll be launching in the Rules Committee next week to identify opportunities for micro-housing on public sites, landfills, or for instance, locations like the old Armory, where we can build a lot of housing very cheaply. So we'll continue to work on a lot of different solutions, but that's the kind of leadership I'll be offering.
This is a problem that's going to take a lot of different tools in the toolbox to deal with over time. And the county and the city actually have been working together very closely and I think productively so far on this, but just putting a dent in the problem at this point. And the county side of it, we put $1.2 million into Destination Home to get people housed, chronically homeless housed. We put another $1 million into Section 8 vouchers, and the federal government cut off the town funding to keep people from being evicted. A lot of them would have been out in the parks. And we've agreed to divert all the redevelopment funding, the tax increment that's no longer going to go to redevelopment for housing, A portion of that will come to the county, and we're donating that, if you will, to the Housing Trust for affordable housing. Ultimately, housing is the answer. But as I alluded to a few minutes ago when we were talking about the fairgrounds, we need to get people from where they are into some form of stabilized housing. And what we have currently isn't enough. That population out there in the parks, for whatever reason, despite social workers and everybody else trying to work with them, they do not want to go into traditional homeless shelters. They seem to have dignity, a certain degree of privacy, and sometimes family issues involved. We're going to have to try a more central approach to getting people into temporary living quarters, stabilizing them, giving them a leg up with all the resources that we do have, and we have a lot at the county level and at the state level and so forth.
Thank you.
So on any given night in the city of San Jose, we have a little bit over 4,000 people sleeping on the streets. And in the county alone, a little bit over 7,000 people sleeping in the streets. We have approximately 60 homeless encampments throughout the city of San Jose, with the biggest one on Story Road in my council district called the Jungle. And in this homeless encampment, we have roughly around 150 to 200 people on any given day. I've been down there a couple of times. Yes, temporary and permanent housing would be a short-term solution, but what we need to do is look at this long-term solution. How can these people become self-supporting and self-sufficient? If we even provide them temporary housing or temporary shelter, permanent housing, if you can't get them a job and they can't become self-supporting, they're going to go back in their old ways again. And so that's the challenging issue that we have here in front of us. And so I think it's going to take a mayor that's going to put this at the forefront and say, how can we eliminate homelessness in the city of San Jose by providing adequate housing and make these people become self-supporting again? How can we do that? I think we can actually tap into federal funding for this. HUD provides opportunities for the city to acquire funding to help with these types of programs. And as a mayor, this will be a priority for me because I think we need to do everything we can to get these people into temporary and permanent housing and also provide them opportunities so that they become self-supporting.
Homelessness is a big issue, and there's a lot of different reasons why people are homeless. We have everybody from veterans out there to families to individuals who've committed crimes who are preying on other people who are homeless. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all reason why people are out there, and it's not a one-size solution either. So I have supported Councilmember Lopardo's ideas on renovating the hotel as well as the small homes. There's other ideas about taking some empty buildings. I think Vice Mayor has suggested that. I think there's a lot of different great ideas to take pieces of this problem. But along with creating some housing, in terms of looking at some of the empty buildings, we could find a solution there if we look at what San Diego and other cities have done to provide some housing and some services in these buildings. But if we do that, then we also need to have a pathway for if those folks who do not want to accept those services, who do not want to come in and receive those services, then we need to also have a way to move them along. Our creeks are in great jeopardy, in the environmental damage that's being done there is also very serious. So we have to look at compassion and we have to look at enforcement as well.
In approximately 2009, I wrote an article called Creekside Living. And that's where I went into the homeless encampments with the San Jose Police Department and all the folks that have done their minor misdemeanors that are doing their community work. And you know, you go down there to these facilities and they built some pretty intricate places, even electrical power from car batteries, etc. And there's a large population there, and of course the consequences to our creek is that there's really no sanitation there. And that's why we have issues with our federal oversight in managing our water supply. And I think that's the part that really touches parks, is especially on trails, is that people, let's say it's on the Guadalupe or the Coyote or different creeks in San Jose, don't necessarily feel comfortable when they see homeless individuals and encampments alongside the creek, and if they don't feel comfortable, then they won't utilize them. What's interesting though is that they don't seem to be in Los Gatos, and they don't seem to be in Campbell. And the situation is when cities like San Jose that are generous, have all the issues of climate, we sometimes get more or less more of the issue. And it's certainly a regional issue. And I think we're all challenged on how to do it. We have some great programs that people talk about, but that's really 2% of the population that's assisting, and the larger portion of the population is not. And it's whether that's going to be from federal stimulus to go build $500 million worth of housing, or that's from a county-wide regional tax, or even Palo Alto does its fair share.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, I think I've heard a couple different suggestions of we wait for others to step up for us. So it's federal funding somehow to come to the rescue. Well, CDBG and home funds have been cut more than a half over the last several years. And there's no hope that we're going to see federal dollars rain from the sky as they did in the time of stimulus, as was suggested earlier. Waiting for Palo Alto to house our homeless isn't going to get us very far either. The reality is, when we go and do surveys of these encampments, as we did just a month ago, we learned that over 90% of the folks who are in the encampments, in fact, last lived in an apartment in San Jose. These are our folks. We need to take responsibility, and that takes leadership here. It means we don't wait for others.
Just 30 seconds.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so I don't see any way out of it. I mean, literally, this is a problem bigger than any one city. And when a problem is a societal, large, billion-dollar type of issue, one city can't do it. And when I bring up Palo Alto, it's because those voters had the opportunity to accept a small number of affordable housing units, and they rejected it. And San Jose has always done the lion's burden of housing and low-income housing, and it's come at a cost, because I mentioned earlier, is all these developers that live in Saratoga were exempt from paying their park fees. These are issues that we have to deal with.
Thank you. Let's go back to Dave, I think. Sorry. It's been one too many for him. San Jose once had 28 park rangers. Now it has 8. Rangers cost less than police officers, and they can provide, they can improve the safety of parks and the perception of safety in parks. That's important to making people feel they can use the parks. Would you support adding rangers as part of your public safety strategy? We have money for police officers. We can't fill the openings as quickly as we would like to, get people trained as quickly as we'd like to. Do you think adding park rangers makes sense for public safety?
Yes, I do, and I'll come back to the question in a moment, but I think that restoring a dedicated workforce in the city of San Jose across the board is job number one. We have a demoralized workforce. I think trust has been broken, especially with the public safety officers, and we've lost a lot of them as well. We had 1,355 years ago when I was on the city council. There's 906 cops today, but we can't just focus on police officers or firefighters. We do need to restore rangers. When you look at how the city's budget is built, it's built, I hope it's still being done this way in the last 5 years, with city service areas. And city service areas link together different areas of the city that are important, that need to work together for the benefit of all of our community. And when I was on the city council, we purposely linked parks and the police department. People said that at first it doesn't make sense, but we linked them up because the relationship between having safe parks, having safe community centers, having safe places for kids to go, and the work, the community policing work that we were trying to move along with a full police force in those days was very, very, very important relationship. So you need both. It's not either or, it's both and. We need both and we need to restore that workforce as soon as we can.
Thank you. Thanks.
I would definitely support hiring more park rangers, simply because I think that it was just really unfortunate years ago that we had to lay off a lot of park rangers due to the budget deficit. But we have an opportunity now to hire them back. It's not some people, new people. But when you look at the overall San Jose, when people make a 911 call, you don't really get the police to respond right away. We all know that. I'm sure many of us in the industry experience that. It's because we place our calls based on priority. There's a violent crime happening somewhere in North San Jose, that's where the police officer is gonna go to. If you have someone who's robbing someone's home, most likely they're not gonna respond until 5 hours later or the next day. And so having park rangers fill in certain things that are being done at the parks, at different open space throughout our city is something that I would definitely support. And I think that also, it's really, really important that when we go to the park, we see a park ranger, you know, either on a horse or walking around. We feel safe, and that's very important, especially for kids or for the elderly population. To see the presence of park rangers throughout parks in the city of San Jose is this sense of safety that we feel, and that's why I think it's so critical to bring back some of these park rangers.
I do support adding additional park rangers. In fact, that's going to be one of my budget requests. We use them in many different ways. It's already been said they help keep our parks safe. They augment our total public safety force. We've also used them in the past. They were very effective in terms of making sure that once homeless folks were no longer living in a creek, keep them from coming back into the creek. And I do think that, as I said before, we need to use compassion, and we also need to use enforcement. San Jose has to make sure that we protect our creeks too. And so once we get some solutions where some of the folks that are living, and I'm thinking of the jungle right now, we can provide opportunities for them to move out into a better condition. I think once they are moved out, we need to have those rangers, because when we use the rangers to manage the park, we had fewer settlements coming back into the parks. When they no longer were there to patrol, then we see a replenishment of the homeless camp in the park, in the creeks.
Sure, I certainly would support more park rangers. As it part of the public safety plan? I think there's an argument for that. I also think there's an argument for a code enforcement employee that writes the code violation that stands along the police officer in certain situations to also be part of the public safety. I think how you add more park rangers, I'll give you one idea, and it's not a lot, but it would maybe add about 6, is currently today the city of San Jose does its own payroll. So we're the ones who process our checks and all that. Well, most private companies you go to, even as big as Cisco Systems or Hewlett-Packard, they outsource their paychecks to ADP or Paychecks with an X at the bottom. And that's essentially, they're able to manage that whole deal. And so therefore, the people that you would normally use to manage that service, they're not needed. There are other jobs in finance they can do, but what have you, those open up the opportunities for funding dollars to fund those park ranger positions. And if we have 8 now and I can give you another 6, that's almost 100% better by just making that one change on how we do our payroll.
Sam?
Yeah, I certainly support more park rangers, but I think the right answer is yes and. Let's face it, our park rangers aren't just chasing Yogi and Boo-Boo around. There are some scary characters out there, and we need police too, and we need both. And that's why 6 months ago I put together a strategy to identify the funding we would need to start to restore our police department. And the council approved that strategy nearly unanimously. We're now in agreement to restore pay with our police officers, the 11% of pay that was cut through the recession. We now had our 3rd class graduate from the academy. Obviously, we know we're having serious issues with retention. That's why we're working on issues around ensuring that disability is made clear to all of our new recruits, that if they're hurt in the line of duty, they'll be taken care of. And we'll restore police, but we've got to do both. And as mayor, I'm going to do both.
Thank you. Let's move to something a little more micro here. Let's start with Madison. There's a proposal before the council that would permit groups of up to 150 people to gather using amplified sound without having to get a permit, clean up after themselves or anything like that. They couldn't serve food, but of course they could bring food. Now, I realize this proposal is going through a lot of different iterations, and I think it was motivated to try to get more spontaneous activity downtown. It is a concern to a lot of people who live near public parks and who have events with permits at public parks. So, what's your general position on allowing gatherings like this with amplified sound, with potentially loud noise or music, in public parks? And should there be something that protects groups that actually have a permit for an event in the park?
Well, I definitely think that they need to have acquired a permit from the city of San Jose before they can actually perform the parks. I'm a big fan of music. I think music in the park is great. It's definitely one of the greatest programs, you know, not just in San Jose, but I think just every city, because it just brings a lot of vibrancy and bringing people together. But at the same time, if you have these events in a neighborhood park where you're surrounded by residents, then, you know, obviously there's going to be noise issues and those complaints that we hear, you know, every Monday morning when we get to work. And so I think that I would support issuing permits for folks who want to play music in the park, but it has to be a park that is somewhat away. There has to be some kind of barrier or wall so that it doesn't impact the residents in terms of the noise. But that's to say that, you know, I think I support all musicians. I think it's great that people can actually showcase their talent in a public space. But at the same time, we need to also consider that if they're actually bringing music or noise to the neighborhood.
I know that this issue has been under discussion in various committees, and we have had the city attorney take a look at it. I think the idea was to try to make it easier for not just groups in downtown, but groups throughout the city that want to get together and hold events, because sometimes the city can really get in the way of groups trying to do things that really benefit the community. But then again, there's always unintended consequences, and so I think it depends on the space. And certainly some of the main spaces downtown, I know that folks were concerned about those kind of gatherings, and I think that there needs to be a different kind of process, procedure for those spaces. We need to make sure that you know, we use common sense. If we've got a group that wants to get together in a little neighborhood park and, you know, and have a gathering, and it's not going to be impactful, you know, on the neighborhoods, I think we need to streamline that process. Obviously, if they're going to have amplified sound and it's going to create problems, then it needs to be a different kind of process. So the idea is we want to make it easier for community groups to come together and do things that actually benefit the community.
So I believe, honestly, that all 5 of us could talk about this one just for an hour, because there's so many nuances of what can go on in the park and the different scenarios. And I'll give you an example: amplified sound. Right? As soon as I thought, like, wow, rock concert, what is that? Well, the Rose Garden, we did the Easter egg hunt last Saturday. Amplified sound. Someone had to speak to tell the kids, you know, hey, let's get everyone ready for the egg hunt. You know, you needed a permit for that to put the 1,000 eggs out there on the lawn and have the kids do it. That would obviously be sort of a low impact. The higher impact might be just that, or you know, a concert, people playing sporadically or spontaneously. So I think there's a interesting thing we're going through, and it's coming back to committee, I think next Monday, and then it'll go to council, I believe, in May. But when we do these things, there's always the attorneys involved, because there's the freedom of speech that, you know, you really can't censor by content. You sort of have to make it a fair process for everyone, but a fair process for everyone may create the scenario that people are uncomfortable with. And so that's why this one is taking a little bit longer to vet out. And again, I seriously think if we had the Parks Department here giving us 5 different examples, you might have 5 different opinions. So.
I agree with everything that Pierluigi said, except for the idea about us talking about this for an hour, because I'm not sure any of you guys would be laughing. You know, context is everything. We have to draw bright lines. The city attorney tells us that. I think the bright line you draw is around geography. Certainly there are contexts in the downtown where we have parks. We expect them to be activated. And it's really hard on festivals and nonprofit organizations that want to have events that draw activity and make for vibrant parks and vibrant downtown, because the red tape is brutal, and we should make it easy for them in those contexts. On the other hand, you know, a lot of the kids I grew up with in their garage bands, you wouldn't want them in any of your neighborhood parks, and they should have a permit. And you know, I think we can draw a line around those areas where we would allow this to be a permit-free zone and make the rest of the city one where we're safely protected.
Dave?
Yeah, it seems to me that you want to regulate the place, which is constitutional, parks. You want to regulate the time and the manner, which is constitutional. And the way to do that is a lot of the organizations that use a park and use a bullhorn or something like that, for example, the Martin Luther King Walk last year, which came out of St. James Park, it's a once-a-year activity. have an ordinance or a policy that says the decibel level can't exceed X, whatever is appropriate. And if anybody's going to do that activity more than once a year, then they need to apply for a permit, make the permit fee nominal. I think one of the things that's happened at the city that's frustrating for people who use the parks, who want to do Easter egg hunts or other activities like that, is that the fee and permit process seems excessive. I got an email today from somebody who wanted to use a softball park here in downtown San Jose for a softball tournament. He said the fees were excessive, but moreover, they couldn't tell him when it was going to be available or not. That's the kind of problem that frustrates people greatly. Make it simple, make it clean, and people are doing once-a-year activities, let them do that and move on.
Thank you. Let's see, we're at Rose, and we have another question from the audience that I think is a good one. The city's green vision does not include parks. Will you, as mayor, include parks in San Jose's green vision? And what would that mean to you? What would be your vision for how parks fit in?
Yes, I would include parks. It's kind of surprising they're not included. I think that's a really good question. Well, I think that we have a goal. We have a goal to make sure that everyone would be able to access a green space within a 10-minute walk. And I think that's an admirable goal, and I think the Green Vision has many goals like that that are not going to be achieved today, but have a vision for doing that. Whether it's creating thousands of jobs, whether it's reducing our footprint, our pollution footprint in San Jose. So I definitely would support adding to the green vision the idea that every resident would be able to be a 10-minute walk from a park.
I would not. I think the green vision is challenging as it is on many levels, and I think parks should be where they are in parks. I believe, though, we should work more on our urban forest and trees. So I believe anything that's allocated in the city right now dealing with trees, simply move it over to our city forest, who does a much better job with every dollar that they get than we do as a city. And their green volunteers and tree amigos would be able to increase the canopy in San Jose to, I think, the level that we all want. We're not on an ocean. We don't have necessarily scenic mountains everywhere in San Jose, but when you do, it does feel special and neat as a neighborhood when it has that tree canopy. And I think if we can do that and use our scarce dollars and allow our city forests to maximize it, then we'll have a better product in the end, and that matches our green vision of all the amenities that you all know what trees do to both on the ecosystem and our communities and neighborhoods.
Okay, Stan?
Well, the Green Vision does put out a vision of 100 miles of trails. And I don't really want to pit trails against parks. I think we all agree they're both very important, both extraordinarily valuable to the quality of life of the city. I would want to find a way to better integrate our trails vision with our parks vision. And that is not simply try to shoot for a numeric goal of 100 miles, but let's connect our major parks by trail to ensure that every child and every adult can get to a park through a trail within a reasonable walking distance, to be able to avoid the traffic, to avoid all those barriers that exist in an artificial environment that we have in a big city like this, and be able to take trails to parks where they can enjoy a Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely think the Green Vision should take parks into account. I was on the city council when the Green Vision came forward. In fact, I was on the city council when we created the Transportation and Environment Committee. There was no committee on the city council during that period of time, the mid-2000s, to even bring an environmental initiative forward. And two of us walked into then Mayor Ron Gonzalez's office and said, as the council appointments were coming up one year, you need to change this committee. You need to add environment to it. There's a lot of expertise in the city, of kind of energy that wants to bring forward something like a green vision for the city at large. That was done then, and when Mayor Reed took office, he took it to heart and brought forward what we now know as a green vision. But the whole point of it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is the idea with it, not just to make green parks. So the idea of connecting transportation and parks in such a way that you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions really should be what it's all about. And that's what that vision should be all about ultimately, because 60% of our greenhouse gases comes from automobiles or vehicles of other kinds. Anything we can do to create a parks environment that helps reduce those vehicle miles traveled is going to be a big deal.
Every mayor who comes into office wants to create his or her own creation or